Welcome to the TimCo Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. In this video, we're going to be limiting who can do what by adding in user roles. This will prevent just anyone from using our register and will allow us to further lock down those endpoints we just created for only administrators. Now, Patreon members, don't forget to head over to my Patreon site to get the source code. If you aren't on Patreon and are interested in getting source code for each TimCo Retail Manager video, head on over and sign up at the $5 per month level or higher to get the source code. This course is closing in on the date when we convert it over to .NET Core. So make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you get alerted each time a new video comes out. You won't want to miss it when we do convert over. We might even throw a party, and there might be some type of live stream event. We'll see. Okay, so let's move on over to Visual Studio. What we want to do is we want to lock down the TRM Data Manager, our API. We want to lock this down so that not everybody who's authorized can do stuff. So let's just make sure we know what's happening right now. So we're going to launch this. We want to have a comparison to where you want to get to. This is always a good first step to take, is if you're doing something, make sure you know the starting spot before you try and work on the end spot so you know what changed. Because maybe it didn't work to begin with. If it didn't work to begin with, then changing something might not be the only thing you have to do. So let's make sure it works first. So we're going to log in using timcorey.com. And as you can see, we're on our sales register, our sales page, where we can perform actions. We can add things to the cart, we could check things out, we could remove things from the cart. This means that my user has access to this page and to these actions. But maybe not everybody should have access to it. One of the questions that came up is, well, if anybody can register and then just start using stuff, why would we ever do registration? Because that's just useless. Anybody can do this. And yes, at our level right now, it is not entirely useless, but somewhat. Because it does take away the anonymity of someone. They have to log in as them. So we know that Tim did this, but at the same time, we're saying that as long as you logged in, then you can do anything you want. So at our controller level, if we look at, let's just say, the sales controller, we have the authorize attribute, but that's it. So as long as you're authorized, you can do everything. You can post, you can get, and the same thing is true for the other controllers. Actually, this controller, nope, this one has authorized. Inventory has authorized, but that's all they have is just authorize. So we want to get beyond this because things like the inventory, that's not something that everyone should have access to. And maybe there's different levels for who can do what. So let's set up some role-based authorizations, and then let's talk through what the best practices are for this. Now, you may see tutorials where what they do is they write some code to put in some initialization information into their database in order to create an admin user off the bat. We're not going to do that. We've already created a user who has no roles, but what we're going to do is manually add some roles. So I go over to my SQL Server Object Explorer and go to Database. And the reason I do this is because I'm not a big fan of putting code in that's going to run once. I'd rather do it by hand so make sure it's right than have code that might create something that's a backdoor I didn't remember. So go to Tables, and if you look at the Roles table, let's do the View Data here. There's nothing in the roles table. Next, let's look at user roles. And there's nothing there either. But notice it says user ID and role ID. So those are the two things in that table. Let's close out these classes. So this is what we're going to do for modification. We're going to add some roles to the role table. And the role is just a name. And we're going to make sure there's no spaces in these names. I'm going to add 3 roles. We're not going to go crazy here. We're going to try and keep this as focused as possible. So a cashier role, that's a person who can use the sales page essentially, or at least the run by somebody else sales page. And so if I move off this, notice you get this error here. It says no rows were updated. The data in row 1 was not committed because you cannot insert a value of null into column ID. And you may have seen this error in your own databases or ones that you follow along with me on. And you say, well, what is this issue? Well, the issue is that this ID field is not auto-incrementing. So if I hit escape here to go away, this is not an auto-incrementing ID. In fact, if we go to look at the designer for this, we will see that it's an nvarchar 128. Oops, that's the user roles. Let's go to roles itself, which is right here. And there we go. It's still an nvarchar 128. Now the name is an nvarchar 256. So what are these nvarchar 128s? Well, these are the GUIDs that we use in the identity system. So if we were to go over to the users table and look at its designer, we'll notice the ID is an nvarchar 128. Okay, and if we look at the values for this, we only have, I think, one row here, but the ID itself, if we expand this out, there we go, there is that GUID. Now it's not 128 characters long, but that is the GUID that they use for this user. Now GUIDs are not like the auto-incrementing IDs for identity where you can say start at 1 and add 1 each time. GUIDs have to be generated. So they're not something you add to the necessarily to the create on its own. So what we need to do is we need to insert something into roles and create a GUID. So we're actually going to have to write some SQL. So don't get intimidated. This is not going to be hard. Let's go to our table. We're our actually database. At that level, you can say right-click and say New Query. So let's write a little SQL script that's going to be insert into dbo.aspnet roles. We're going to have to specify which fields. Well, it's the ID field and the name field. And I put that in square brackets because name is actually a reserved word. It's going to turn blue. It won't be the end of the world, but I'd prefer to have it in the square brackets. And the values are going to be new ID. And that's a method essentially. And then the name of my role. So the name of the role that we're going to start with is cashier. Now let's add a few more. So I'm going to copy this. And I'll say comma and the next one and then comma and the next one. Now, some people say, well, why would you put the comma at the start of the line instead of the end of the line? And here's why. If I ever decide I want to get rid of just one of these lines, now it's not going to happen here. But if I wanted to, I'd come down here in the middle somewhere and put a comment. And notice how it now skips this line entirely and goes to this line. And if I commented out this line as well, this will still be a valid SQL statement because there's no comma at the end here. So comments at the beginning make it easier to comment out only certain lines in your query. That's just the reason why we do it that way. Now I do want to move it out a little bit. So we don't want 3 cashiers. That actually wouldn't work because of the fact that we have to have different names for our roles. I can't have 2 roles of the same name. So I'm going to have cashier, I'm going to have manager, and I'm going to have admin. And we're not going to necessarily use all of these today, but I want to have these 3 roles to show some differences. So those are the 3 roles I'm going to have. I'm going to run this insert statement. Now, right now, again, roles is empty. But if we run this, 3 rows affected. And if we come back over here and refresh this, we now have 3 roles with GUIDs for their ID. So the GUID, we have the name of the role. So admin, cashier, and manager. And now we can start using them. Well, not quite. because now we have the idea of the user roles. So right now there's nobody in the user ID and role ID matchup. And this is where when you're first starting out, it's a little tricky because of the fact that we're doing this manually. This is only to start. This is only a setup, because what we're going to do is create some admin screens that will allow us to add people to roles, add roles to the table, all these different things we can do without having to drop in a SQL. We can do it through the user interface. But we definitely wouldn't want to allow that to be done by anybody. So we need some administrators first, or at least one administrator first, before we can allow anybody to have that power. So we're going to wait to do that, and we're going to do it manually at first. The benefit here is it also gives you the opportunity to see what's going on behind the scenes. So it's not just this magical things work. You can actually see what's happening and why. So we have our users table, which let's look at the data there. So this is my user ID right here. I'm going to copy that. It's off a screen, but that's okay. And we can put this in for various roles. So right now we have a user ID and a role ID. So the user ID, I'm going to paste in my user ID. Let's expand that out and expand this out. So there's my user ID. And now we need a role ID. Well, what is the role ID I want to give to my username? Well, if you go to roles and view data, we can see we have 3: admin, cashier, and manager. Let's do this for now. I'm going to say that I am an administrator. I'm going to paste this over in the role ID. And we're done. Now my user ID is associated with the role ID of admin. Now this is a many-to-many relationship, so I can add my user ID again down here and a different role ID. Or I could add a different user ID in the same role ID as I have. That's that many-to-many relationship. So for right now, we're going to leave it at just this one role of admin. Now let's close all this down. I'm not going to save the query, so you might want to screenshot this real quick if you had any questions on how it works. So this won't be in the source code that you get. Okay, so now what we're going to do is let's unpin this for now, and we're going to go over our controllers, and let's look at some. Let's go to our inventory. I believe the inventory is what's called when we want to load our user interface. So let's look at what the UI does. We've got the API, and we're asking for, I believe we're asking for the inventory. We've got a sales endpoint, which a sales endpoint gets or posts the sale. The product, we have product. Okay, so product gets all. Gotcha. So this is a little confusing, and I probably should document it somewhere. The inventory is the things that we've basically put in the warehouse. We've bought a lot of 50 widgets, as we put 50 widgets in the warehouse. The product list is what products do we have and what's the total quantity of those products. So if we bought 50 widgets, but we already had 10 in the warehouse, the product table is going to say we have 60 total widgets. We have the 50 and the 10. So it's the product control that we're going to lock down. So right now, we can get a list of all the products. But if I were to say right here after authorize, put a paren and say roles equals, I can lock this down and say, you know what? Only cashiers can see this. Now notice I put in just text. So that's how roles work. We use just text when we say cashier. There are ways we may investigate it. Let me know if you want to go down that path. Put a comment down below if you want to go this way. We may investigate getting away from these magic strings and putting some type of enum or a constant in there instead. It's a little more tricky. It's not as simple as just putting an enum here. And the reason why is because this cannot be a calculation. It has to be a constant. But we can do things like this. Comma space admin. Actually, no space. Comma admin. Which means that it's the cashier role or the admin role. This is the or. So that you can't do the constant as easily. There are ways of doing it. But again, let me know if you want to go down that route or if you want to keep it simple. Okay, so I'm going to say cashier for now, and that's it. Now, you remember, I didn't put myself in the cashier role. I put myself in the administrator role. How is that going to work? Well, let's find out. So we're going to start this up. Remember, it did work. So we now have a baseline for if we have any problems, we're going to find out now. Let's also look at let's move this off from it. We're going to look at the output here, just so we can see any issues that pop up. And I'm going to say login, and I get this unauthorized exception. Now, it drops me in a code, and it says, hey, the sales view model, we've got an unauthorized exception. That's because we're in code, and I didn't handle it in any way. I didn't capture the exception that says, okay, if you're unauthorized, then what do you do? So that's something that I need to deal with. But right now, what it's saying is it actually crashed the application, and it says you can't go on. Your heart will not go on. This is done because you're unauthorized. Ideally, and we're going to come back, not in this video, but in another video, we're going to come back and add in that exception handling to deal with what happens when you're unauthorized. Because it shouldn't be that it crashes the application. It should be that it says, hey, you can't do that. Let's not send you this page. Or let's not even give you the option of viewing the sales page because you don't have authorization to see it. Now, the question may come up, well, but you're an administrator. Shouldn't administrators be able to do everything? And the answer is probably yes, but that's not how we set it up. The system has no clue who's an administrator and who's not. It doesn't know that admin means super user role that can do everything. It just knows I have 3 roles. You're not in the role that can use this or can list these products. So therefore, you can't see this. So another option is we could either do this and say, well, a cashier or an administrator. But it would seem like also that cashier, manager, and administrator should be able to do this. Now you see how this is getting a little complicated because now we're having to add all these different roles that might have to be able to be a cashier. Now we're going to put that on pause for a minute and make sure this works. And then we're going to talk about alternatives to this more complex style here. So once the API loads up, I'll log in, and now I can see my list again. My sales page comes up. I am authorized to start working with this. That's because I am in the admin role, and that's one of the roles that's authorized to use the product controller. So that's one way of going about it is by putting multiple roles on top of an item. But there may be a case for not allowing even an administrator to be a cashier. If you think about it, a cashier might be somewhat of a trained role. It's not something where you just step in and say, because I'm the boss, I get to do this. There's some training involved in how to take a credit card or how to refund a product or whatever those things may be. And so it may be that not everybody should be a cashier, even if they are higher up in the food chain at the organization. So I think it makes sense that maybe this is just a cashier role. Now, obviously, list product use other places, so that may not be possible for this specific thing. But let's just pretend it is. If we say, well, only cashiers can do this, the alternative is to come back over to the user roles and the roles table and say, okay, Well, this is the cashier role. I'm going to copy that. Go to the user roles. Let's expand these out and say, I'm going to create an authorization for this new role. And oops, I can't go up one. I have to go over to my user ID table. And I have to grab this ID. So I can paste that ID in. So now my ID is both an administrator and a cashier. It's both of those things. So now, even though there's only cashier on this role, if I were to run this, it should be that I can use the sales page. So I log in. Yes, I can. I can use the sales page, even though I'm an administrator, because I'm also a cashier. So that's the alternate way of applying these permissions is you could either say, here's 2 or 3 roles that can do this, and we'll do that. But the alternate way of doing it is to say, or the people that can do this need to be added to that role as well. So now I'm a cashier administrator. I'm both. So let's look at a couple of these endpoints just to cover some other things that we need to do. Sales page. Who can buy stuff? You know what? This should probably be cashier only. Roles equals cashier, like so, because a cashier should only be able to actually post a sale. But wait a minute though, sales report. That's not really right, because a sales report, maybe all administrators should be able to get that, but not cashiers. So now you have a quandary. What do you do here for this, where you have this should be cashiers and this should be administrators? Well, this actually becomes somewhat simple. Let's copy this and paste it right above post. Then take away this roles right here. And now you have to be authorized to use the sales control at all. But we don't specify what role you have to be in, just authorized. But now down here for posting a sale, you have to be a cashier to do that. But what about this get sales report? Well, I think we should say that one should be an admin. And maybe a manager too. So if you're an admin or a manager, you can get a sales report. That seems most logical. Let's look at the rest of our controllers to make sure you've locked things down appropriately. So let's close out of everything. Let's go to our values controller. Well, values controller is actually that dummy controller we never really got rid of. So let's do that now. Let's delete that. User controller. User controller is get user by ID. That's where we figure out who that user is. So it gives us more information about who they are. That's just authorized. As long as you're authorized, you can get the information about yourself. And that's all that would be, is yourself. Because it's getting your user ID and then looking up your information by your user ID. So that's just for yourself. That's fine. We've already touched the sales controller and the product controller. Now let's look at inventory controller. Inventory, who can get the inventory and who can post inventory? Well, it seemed like, again, we have this idea of a split responsibilities, because I would think that the manager or the admin can get the inventory list. Or maybe everybody can get inventory, who knows? But I think that let's start with just manager and administrator, because they're the ones managing the warehouse. Whereas, and who can post to the inventory seems like, for right now, an admin. An admin can buy products and put them in the warehouse. Let's leave it at that. Eventually, it may be that we have a warehouse manager or an inventory manager or something like that, where they're the person that's doing a purchasing, and maybe we create a role for them. We will see. Next, let's go to the home controller. And the home controller just shows us that home page. Anybody should be able to view that. And we have the account controller. And this is authorized, but then notice if we come down here, there are certain actions that are actually allowing anonymous. So let's come down here, change password, set password, add external login, remove login. There we go. External login, allow anonymous. So here's the other option as well, is if you have a whole controller that is authorized, you can pull things out and say, well, actually that one's not. In this case, the get external login is allow anonymous. So you can post your information in order to log in. And of course, you're not authorized until you've actually done it. So therefore, it has to be anonymous until then. And there's a couple of those as well. There's another allow anonymous. So there's another option for us if we decide that certain things should be viewable by everybody. Because it may be that we create a web page where we can sell things directly to users. So they have to be authorized, maybe. They have to be authorized probably, but they don't have to be authorized in order to list the products. So they don't have to be logged in order to see what we have to sell. They just have to be logged in order to buy something. But again, not in a role necessarily, just, hey, as long as you log in, we'll let you buy something. But to list our products, nobody needs to be logged in order to see what we have to sell. So there's various different options here. The one option we didn't cover, I do want to talk about, even though this is a start to finish course, I do want to try and teach as I go. And one of the things that we're missing here or not using is the idea of additive roles. Meaning, maybe you have to be in order to post here, you have to be both an administrator and a warehouse worker, because only warehouse workers who are admins can add to the inventory. So it's not just that you're a warehouse worker, and it's not just that you're an administrator, you have to be both. How would you do that? Because this is an or. Well, the way to do that is to do it like this. So now you have warehouse worker and admin. So you have to be both of these roles in order to do a post here, not just one of these roles. That's the and relationship. Okay, so those two are anded together. These two are or'd, meaning either or. Just want to show you that. We don't have a warehouse worker role, and I don't think we need one at this point. Now, one of the questions that comes up is, well, how do you put roles inside of roles? And you don't really. And what you have to do is take a step back from this and really realize what we're doing here. Yes, this is a bit simplistic in its management, but at the same time, there's a ton of power here that you're probably just not thinking about. So with these roles, we can use these authorization rules to say, yes, you can, or no, you can't, and either or an and if you have an and. So you can do a lot on this side. And the other thing is we have that many-to-many relationship so that you can add people to as many roles as you want. But it gets even more granular in the fact that once we're inside of these calls, you can perform more actions. Now let's go look at the sales controller. So in the sales controller, let's close all of this. The sales controller, we're getting the user ID. So we know who the user is. Now they're a cashier, but we're saying, okay, specifically who are you so I can record the sale to just you. So if we were reporting data, so if this, instead of a post, it was a get, if we were reporting data back, we could say, okay, you have to be a cashier, but just because you're a cashier doesn't mean you get every cashier's information. You only get your own. Well, that's where this comes in, where you can find out specifically who the person is. And then, yes, they have to be a cashier, but we're only going to return their data for just them, not all cashiers. So that's how you limit it even more. But we also have the idea, and I really discourage this, but we do have this option here. So if we said authorize, let's be additive. Notice instead of roles, we can say users equals, and we can set who the user is. Don't do this. Okay? This would be if you locked it down to a specific user. That is just, I can't think of a reason why you'd want to use that. It's just too locked down. Use roles. Work everything against a role. Even if you have to create a role that's super admin that only you go in. That's fine. Just create that role. That way later, when you decide to sell the company, you can put somebody else in that super user group and take yourself out. And now they have full control and access, and you don't, without changing anything in your code. You don't have to give your password to somebody else or anything else ugly like that. So there is that option as well that, again, I suggest you avoid. But with roles, between the role ID and the user ID, you can limit things so that this filters out the big chunks. Okay, so it says, if you're not a cashier, you don't get through this trainer. But still, let's just say 18 people got through because they're cashiers. Well, yes, but if we're returning data here, we can say, but only return your data, not all 18 cashiers' data. So that is helpful. There's one more thing, and that is if we get the sales report, but we're asking for either an administrator or a manager, you might want to know down here, well, who are they? Are they a manager or are they an administrator? You can get their user ID, that's cool, but we really want to know, hey, if they're an administrator, maybe you get more on your report than if you're a manager. A manager only gets certain things on the report. What you can do is you can say request context dot principal dot is in role. And that will check to see if the person is in the admin role. And so you could wrap this, let's just do it real quick with some pseudocode. So if requested principal is in the role administrator, do admin stuff. Otherwise, do manager stuff. Or you could do the else if and say, well, not admin, it's actually manager, and then do manager stuff instead. And that else if would protect you against if you add a third role up here. But that way we can change things based upon the role you're in, and we can know what role you're in based upon that is in role method that we have access to. So a lot of power here we can use. We're going to use just the tip of it with just cashier, admin. Probably that's all, but we've added in manager just in case. And right now, there is no way to programmatically, or at least not in the front end, to add a person to a role. So if a user signs up right now and they register their username and password and it says, great, you're signed in, they still can't do anything because everything is now locked down by role. So yes, they're authorized. Cool. We can know that you exist, and maybe if we had some methods like buy your own stuff, for an online web page, then they could do those things. But for right now, they can't do anything, even though they can log in. So they can create their own, they can register for themselves, but they can't do anything because they're not one of these roles. In order to get in one of these roles, right now we have to go into SQL and add that user to the role manually. We'll create some nice admin pages that will allow us to add people to roles easily without having to go to SQL. But for right now, that is roles. So things coming up we need to do probably pretty quick, and we may do both at once. We'll see how long it takes. One, we need to work on our WPF front end because right now it's crashing when we're not authorized, and that's not cool. We need to make sure that we give the user a message that says, hey, you don't have access to this, and maybe not even show them the the pages they don't have access to, or don't even send them there. And then also we need to add that nice user interface for adding in roles and adding roles to users. So we'll do that in upcoming videos. But for now, this is the adding roles to users. And let's go ahead and commit our code. Let's make sure that we've saved everything that we have. And let's review. We've got the inventory controller, which the difference is the authorization. Product controller, which we've changed from authorized to authorized role of cashier. The sales, which we add the authorized roles for each of the endpoints. We deleted the value controller, and of course we have our changes in our CS proj itself because we deleted that file. Let's stage those and say add user roles. Add authorization by role to the endpoints. Sounds good enough. We're going to commit to stage. We're going to go over to the sync page, and I can do a fetch. There's nothing coming down because we do everything on screen here, so therefore we're going to do a push. Okay, once that's done, we've now committed our source code, pushed it up to the server, and we are done. Okay, thanks for watching. As always, I am Tim Corey.